let's play a game of how stupid can the media be when they are literally calling people they disagree with idiots, shall we? I think that's a really fun game to play. So there was this article that came to my attention from the Daily Mail. The article's from a couple days ago, but people started sending it to me on Parler today saying, Carlin, what do you think about this study? And I absolutely have thoughts about it. So let's take a look. Real Cove idiots. People who refuse to wear a mask or comply with social distancing have lower cognitive ability, new study shows. Now, I just want you to take special care to pay attention to that specific headline. People who refuse to wear a mask is their lead, or comply with social distancing, have lower cognitive ability. And we're going to talk about why the Daily Mail headline and article writers need to get a grip and realize that that headline is completely wrong. That is not what that study says. It is not what that study says at all. So we're going to read this article, and then we're going to look at the abstract from the actual study that was actually published, and we're going to talk about why the Daily Mail needs to hire new headline writers, if nothing else. But before we do that, listen, folks, I'm trying to grow the channel. I really want to get to the 100,000 subscribers in, a couple of months or so. So please, if you like the content I'm producing, subscribe to my channel, give it a thumbs up, turn on those notifications, do all that good stuff. Let's read the article. The term COVIDiots is a coronavirus-era slang term for someone who ignores recommendations to limit the spread of the deadly disease, and a new study reveals that what makes these people diminish these warnings. Researchers found that whether or not an individual decides to follow social distancing depends on how much information their working memory can store, which determines mental abilities such as intelligence. Now, I want you to pay attention to this sentence right here and what they did and did not mention. Researchers found that whether or not an individual decides to follow social distancing depends on how much information their working memory can store, which determines mental abilities such as intelligence. Did they say anything about masks? No, they didn't, but they got this big whopping headline about people who refusing to wear masks are idiots, but that's not what actually the study said at all. The study didn't say anything about people who refuse to wear masks. Let's keep going. Following a study of 850 Americans, which occurred back in March, by the way, and remember, and of course they don't write that in this article either, but remember back, let's just rewind back to March when we were seeing silly things like the Surgeon General of the United States telling people not to wear masks. Yes, that actually happened. I'll find a picture of it. I'll put it right in the thing. Yes, that happened. Back in March, the Surgeon General of the United States said don't wear masks because what they were trying to do was to save all the protective equipment for, wait for it, hospital workers. And that is when this study was conducted. But let's keep going. The team discovered that those with more working memory capacity were more likely to comply with recommendations during the early stage of the outbreak. The findings suggest that policymakers need to promote compliance behaviors such as wearing a mask. They've brought up the mask again. The study did not bring up the mask, based on individuals' general cognitive abilities to avoid effortful decisions. So what they're saying is, you need to explain to these morons who refuse to wear masks in the simple possiblest terms why they really need to wear a mask, because they're simply not smart enough to understand otherwise. When the Daily Mail literally wrote a whole article about masks when the study had nothing to do with masks. And I'm going to prove it. I'm going to prove the study had nothing to do with masks. So this is the actual published study. Now, I'm not going to look at the whole thing because I'm not going to get a subscription and I'm not going to pay for it. I'm sorry. But what we are going to do is look at just some excerpts from it and the abstract from it. We're going to look at like an overview that the journal wrote, and then we're going to look at the abstract for the actual article, so we can see that in nowhere in either of those things do they describe masks. Now, here's why this is important. This is a very important distinction to make. Social distancing is not the same thing as wearing a mask. I'm going to say that again for the people in the back. Social distancing, which is the act of standing 6 feet apart from the people around you, that is not the same thing as wearing a mask. you can choose as an adult that is capable of taking in information and processing it and making decisions for yourself. You can choose to wear a mask and you can choose to social distance. That's one option. You can also choose to social distance but not wear a mask. And in fact, back in March, and again, March is when this study was actually run, back in March, what they kept saying was you really only need to wear a mask if you are not in a place where you can socially distance. That's what the recommendations was at the time. You don't need to wear a mask if you can also socially distance. So adults can choose to social distance, which again is to remain 6 feet away from people around you so as not to accidentally spread the virus. You can do the social distancing and also make the choice not to wear a mask. And then you can also choose to do neither of those things. This study is not looking at masks. It is looking at social distancing. These pesky details. Journalists simply don't have the working memory to process all of these pesky details. So the study is in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of America. The working memory capacity predicts individual differences in social distancing compliance during the COVID-19 pandemic in the United States. So we're just gonna point out every time social distancing comes up here. Social distancing, number 1. Does it say mask in the headline? No, it doesn't. Let's keep going. Significance. Before vaccination and other intervention measures became available, successful containment of an unknown infectious disease critically relies on people's voluntary compliance with recommended social distancing guidelines. That involves a decision to prioritize the merits of social distancing over its costs, which may depend on one's ability to compare multiple pieces of potentially conflicting information regarding social distancing in working memory. Our data supports this hypothesis, highlighting the critical role of one's working memory capacity in social distancing compliance during the early stages of the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic. The observation reveals a core cognitive limitation in one's response to public health crisis and suggests a possible cognitive venue for developing strategies to mitigate the challenge. The significance of this does not mention masks at all. So why is the Daily Mail writing a huge headline saying people who refuse to wear a mask or comply with social distancing have lower cognitive ability? They made that up. Literally made it up. Let's read the abstract just to make sure that this study is not about masks. Let's read the abstract because listen, guys, for abstracts, if masks were studied in the course of this inquiry, they would write about it in the abstract. If they don't write about it in the abstract and they're not writing about it in the significance, then the chances of there actually being mask-related information in this study to any great degree is like 0. It's probably not going to be there. But let's read the abstract just to make sure. And again, I'm just going to highlight every time I see social distancing. And to keep myself honest, if I happen to see the word mask, I'll highlight that too. I'll highlight it in a different color. Non-compliance with social distancing. I know this takes a second. I got to figure out a shortcut. During the early stage of coronavirus disease 2019, COVID-19 pandemic poses a great challenge to the public health system. The non-compliance behaviors partially reflect people's concerns for the inherent costs of social distancing. Again, social distancing. While discounting its public health benefits, we propose that this oversight may be associated with the limitation in one's mental capacity to simultaneously retain multiple pieces of information in working memory for rational decision-making that leads to social distancing compliance. We tested this hypothesis in 850 United States residents during the first 2 weeks of the presidential declaration of national emergency because of the COVID-19 pandemic. We found that participants' social distancing, blah, 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 compliance at this initial stage could be predicted by individual differences in working memory capacity, partly due to increased awareness of benefits over cost of social distancing among higher working memory capacity individuals. Critically, the unique contribution of working memory capacity to the individual differences in social distancing. This keeps coming up, doesn't it? This keeps coming up. It's like they didn't even read the study that they're writing about. Social distancing compliance could not be explained by other psychological and socioeconomic factors. Okay, this is actually interesting. I'm going to highlight this for a different reason. Critically, the unique combination of working memory capacity to the individual differences in social distancing compliance could not be explained by other psychological and socioeconomic factors, e.g. moods, personality, education, and income levels. So I'm going to highlight that in green because it's a little bit different. Listen, so what's interesting to me about this is it doesn't appear as though they studied news consumption. It doesn't appear as though they were looking at what information sources people were actually taking in, because if people were listening to the president and the president's cabinet, namely the Surgeon General, they would have been told not to wear masks, okay? Now, if people were listening to, like, MSNBC, who's like, this is the worst thing ever, oh my god, we're all gonna die from the virus. If they were doing that, then they're probably gonna be more likely to wear a mask. So I find it interesting that they didn't include information sources or how they're consuming news into the study. But let's finish this up. Furthermore, the critical role of working memory capacity in social distancing compliance can be generalized in the compliance of another set of rules of social interactions, namely the fairness norm in Western cultures. Collectively, our data reveals contributions of core cognitive processes underlying social distancing compliance during the early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic, highlighting a potential cognitive venue for developing strategies to mitigate a public health crisis, to communicate with those dummies that are not, well, this is about communicating with those dummies who aren't social distancing, right? So let's just count in the abstract. How many times do they say social distancing? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times in a paragraph abstract. And they also say it here in this significance. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 times in the significance. So even if a reporter didn't even read the study, but only read the significance paragraph, they've got 4 times where they mention social distancing and 0 for masks. In the abstract, they've got 8 times where they mention social distancing, but 0 for masks. And still, the Daily Mail, COVIDiots, people who refuse to wear a mask or comply with social distancing, have lower cognitive ability. You know, when I took Psychology 101 in college, and this is like back in like 1999. This is like a long time ago. Times have changed. I actually did it at the library in college. Oh my god. You don't have to do that anymore. But when I took Psychology 101, one of the assignments we actually had was to find a news article about a psychological study and then go find the actual psychological study and do a compare and contrast between the two, because, spoiler alert, the media has always done this nonsense. They've always done this nonsense where they take these studies that are really specific about a really specific time frame, a really specific factor, a really specific phenomenon, and then they completely misinterpret it in the reporting of the study. They've done this for decades, probably since the time that there's been newspapers and psychological studies. So it should be no surprise that the Daily Mail has done that here. Now, this article goes on and on and on, and it doesn't actually say anything of importance. Really what it does is it goes back, and it's just like, and I'll link it in the description. You can go read it if you want. I'm not going to waste my time reading it. I just wanted to make a point about they're distorting the original study. But it's on and on, fear-mongering about this horrible disease. And we've seen, you can even see right here, we've seen a spike in new cases in Florida. And oh my god, everyone's going to die of this virus. If only we could communicate with these idiots who don't have the working memory to realize that they really need to wear a mask. And that's going to be the answer. But you know what I'd really like the BBC to do an article on is, how about the mental capacity or the intelligence of all of these Black Lives Matter protesters that are not socially distancing in London or anywhere in the United States or anywhere around the world where these protests are happening. And look, they aren't even wearing masks either. Daily Mail, when are we gonna have an article about the intelligence level of the Black Lives Matters protesters? Not to mention the people who looting and rioting and burning down buildings and all of those things. When are we gonna have an article about their mental ability? That'll be interesting. I won't hold my breath on that one. I think I'd be waiting a long time. But you see my point. Of course that article's not going to come up. All they want to do is attack the idiots who won't wear masks. This is what these people do every damn time. You know? I think I've made my point. That's all I've got for this one. I'll be back at you soon.